Silver City, rolling.
Goldberg will be back tomorrow night.
5,
Stand by now for 7 p.m.
3, 2. We're on air.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. It's lovely to be here. I was 15 when ABC television started in Perth, living in Netherlands with my mum and my grandma, I remember, and from then on my teenage years were spent watching Z-Cars, and Dr. Finley's Casebook, and May Gray, and Earl Reeve, Jimmy Fisher, last on the list, Ian Beattie, Clive Hale, Jim Fitzmaurice, even occasionally, gloriously, Ron Halcombe. Certainly Tony Parker, then John Barnett doing the weather, the wonderful elegance and worldly charm of Sandra Harris. I was about 17. Still remember her lips. Diana Ward, Jenny Edwards, those beautiful women who presented the nightly lineup. And of course the first attempts at local current affairs that brought us names that became known Australia-wide later on, people like John Penlington and Richard Oxenberg. And then I turned 21 and came to work at the old Red Hill Studios in Adelaide Terrace. And I started to learn about the hive of activity and expertise, all the mysteries that went on behind those black and white television screens, the magic of the workshop area, with its fascinating, constantly transforming display of sets and props made by those wonderful craftsmen, the endless spools of film and vast reels of videotape down the end in telecine and VT. The unbelievably beautiful and charming young women in the makeup room, which determined me that I would spend as much of the rest of my life in the makeup room as I could. And I did. I don't suppose Sue Burns is here, is she? Yes! Yes! I'll meet you in a minute now. Because I'm very proud to have played even a small part in that opening decade of ABW Channel 2 in Perth. But we're here to celebrate not just that opening decade and the people who are involved in that, but all of us and all of you who've been involved at any stage in the wealth of material that has come out of this basically very small and usually underfunded and understaffed organisation over the past 50 years. Let's all give ourselves a bit of a round of applause for what we did manage to achieve. I'd like to start by going back to the very, very beginning when the ABC was still actually basically operating out of the old St George's Terrace building, the ancient building where Council House now stands, while they were putting the finishing touches to the new building up in Terrace Road and Adelaide Terrace. And there was one bloke who was there with the rubble still in the corner of Studio 61 to do his first television audition. Would you welcome Earl Reeve? Come on. Dear colleague and a great mentor, and as I said yesterday, one of the great foundation stones of ABC broadcasting, Earl Reeve.
Thanks, Becker.
Share a few memories, mate. Talk to us.
Well, yes, the rubble in the ABC yet to be built studio is something I'll never forget, but more so the sheer terror of looking at something. They said, look at that, and it was like something out of Doctor Who, this great big lens looking at you. I hadn't had a shave, I have today, thank heaven, and they said, read that and look at the camera, and I thought, I can't do both. So most of the audition was spent with people looking at the top of my head. It was a pretty terrifying thing, and I thought, oh, that's it, I've blown it. my chances of ever appearing on television because of my ears looked like a cab with the doors open, my nose was broken, had been for many years, so I thought, well, that's it. A couple of weeks later they said, you're going to be one of the newsreaders on television. And when television began, the terror began all over again. Because I'd been a radio newsreader for many years, thank God, and was trained by some of the best people, best trainers the world could ever imagine. And here I was going to be seen as well as heard, which if you look in the mirror from where I'm looking, you think, God, you know, what a shame. So one of the early things they said was, look, it's okay, you can come and read news, but we're going to pin your ears back to 10. And I said, okay, you do whatever you want to do, but what if one of them goes, dong, in the middle of a news bulletin? It's a bit like a newsreader picking his nose. Nobody's going to hear what I'm saying. Anyway, it all started, and I began a week after television opened, doing a thing called Sports View on Saturday afternoons, followed by reading the news a number of evenings a week. In a very early edition of the Sports View, we had, by the way, this window at the back of us with gently wafting curtains and a view of Langley Park and a windowsill. And I'm talking away, introducing a film, as it was then, a sporting film of some kind, and I realised everyone around me was laughing, but they were all looking this way, and I was the only person looking this way at the camera. What had happened was a hand came over the windowsill, and then another hand, and then a head appeared, and a man in a suit climbed through the window, and by now people are lying on the floor crying with laughter, and I'm still talking and trying to work out what was happening. It was Jim Fitzmaurice, who dusted himself off lightly, walked past me and said, hi Earl. I said, hi Jim, thinking what the hell has happened here. Later I realised what had happened. Nobody ever could film that or record it, which is a bit of a shame. In the early days we wore theatrical makeup, 5 and 9, and lipstick. This was thick, greasy makeup. Now some people probably on the staff were rather delighted to be able to wear lipstick. Some of the blokes had it. Not me, I found it pretty cumbersome. Our collars were all stuffed with tissues prior to the makeup, so none went on your collar. Dear old Jim Fisher, in the second week of television news, was running terribly late. He was our first newsreader. He rushed into the studio and said good evening, looking like something from the Elizabethan era, with this frilly collar. Nobody heard what he was saying, and after a moment he said, oh, I'm sorry about all this, and pulled all the tissues out, threw them away, all but swore, and got on with reading the news. Many memories, but most of them to do with practical jokes. The early days of television, it was nothing to have the male crew drop their trousers while you were trying to read the news, and they'd be waving various parts of the anatomy at you, and I'll leave the rest to your imagination. It was hard not to be put off. The dear late Jim Stafford was one of our early floor managers, God bless him. He spent one evening next to this tiny little desk, which was the news desk in the early days, made of 3-ply. If you sneezed, the whole thing would blow over. My edition of the news, my copy, which you read to camera, you looked at the page and read, and tried to look up and down a bit like a chook pecking wheat. My copy had been dropped and was all in the wrong order. So dear Jim Stafford spent the whole bulletin scuttling across on his hands and knees with the whole news bulletin laid out across the floor, giving me page by page. I said to him afterwards, God, you know, that was incredible, Jim. He said, well, I haven't done that since I was about 3 months old, crawling around the floor. Wonderful man. A couple more stories, if I can see. One of the old age. Limits his eyesight. Alan Bateman, another floor manager, and I used to often throw things at each other during news bulletins, that is, during film inserts. And this particular evening we were having a fight, throwing paper clips and bits of paper and so on. Into the control room came this tall, besuited figure standing behind the technical crew. And he said to someone, does this sort of thing go on very often? And they said, oh, mate, you should be here some nights. This is nothing. This was our new manager. We had a very stern talk to Alan Bateman and myself and many others afterwards. I suppose one of my hairiest moments in television, dare I say, was early on when it was a Sunday night. I hadn't had a shave. I had a casual shirt. I'd been doing a role in the booth, the announcing booth, where they just heard you and didn't see you. And somebody rushed in at 5 to 7 and said, look, we don't have a newsreader. And I said, well, what do you want me to do about it? They said, read the news. I said, oh my God. What? Ian Beattie had gone home. He'd done a shift thinking he'd finished. And he'd gone home. The newsroom thought he was in the studio. The studio thought he was in the newsroom and coming down. So I had to get a jacket from the wardrobe, borrow a tie from somebody, try and shave a little, put some makeup on, and the next thing I read, half an hour of news at sight. And it probably is one of the better news bulletins I've read, which says something, I don't know. But I could go on all day. But I think one of the things that should change in television, and the technology has changed frighteningly, is the person sitting at the desk, overdressed, in an air-conditioned studio, made up, reading about things that are happening in the world around them, which really have no relationship to the presenter of the news. I don't know how they're going to change that, but maybe one day they will. God bless you all. Thanks, Peter, for having me.
You stay up here. Earl Reeve.
Yeah.